I'm there.
Okay. Okay, great. So, good morning, good evening to all esteemed guests who have joined today for this special keynote and very important and very relevant talk organized by Partha Ghosh Academy of Leadership at Indian Institute of Technology, Kharagpur. In the capacity as the chairman of this academy, I welcome you all. It's my immense pleasure to welcome you all to this evening and this morning at the different place in evening at India. So for this special talk. Before proceed to listen to the keynote speaker, Professor Partha Ghosh, I'd like to brief you all about the this unique initiative that has been taken up at IIT Kharagpur. We started this academy, started journey officially we will say is inaugurated in December 2021, and we had a very nice in it programs and this is where we like to inculcate and kind of like train the uh, people, especially young minds, inculcate the leadership traits to the young minds, and at all level I would say. And this academy is going to we started already the few lecture series. I mean, this international monthly leadership lecture series has been started from January, and today is the third talk which is going to be delivered by our beloved Professor Partha Ghosh, who is also our illustrious alumni of IIT Kharagpur, distinguished illustrious alumni at IIT Kharagpur, and as well as the founder of this Partha Ghosh Academy Leadership at IIT Kharagpur. So, with these words, with this brief introduction, I would like to request Commander VK Jetley to uh, share his few thoughts. He has been since beginning of the journey of this academy, and then further request to Krishnan Khanna ji to introduce our speaker for today's talk. So, Commander Jetley ji.
Thank you, Shailendra Vashne, for inviting me to say a few words. Yes, let me tell you, everybody, though some of you may be attending this talk for the first time, this is the third one. The first one was on 29th January. The second one was on 20th February. And today on 29th, we are having the third one. The first one was by none other than one of the great ministers from India, Shri Suresh Prabhuji, who had so many ministries, a very learned person, an international authority on so many areas. And he spoke on Indians leading the world towards global harmony. Unfortunately, despite so many of us talking about global harmony, the global harmony keeps evading us. And that is our topic today, what Partha Ghosh will be talking about. And actually, the crises have been happening in the history of the humankind from long back, ages, thousands of years. Even Lord Krishna couldn't stop the Mahabharata war. Mahatma Gandhi couldn't stop World War I and World War II. So who are we? But Partha Ghosh is going to try today if he can put some sense in the minds of the global leaders today. Our second talk was on 20th February by another glorious figure from IIT Kharagpur itself, R. Gopala Krishnan, who happened to be the director of Tata Sons, the vice chairman of Unilever, and he is a great authority with 17 books he has written. I really admired. And he keeps writing for so many newspapers. So our efforts are always to present you the top leaders. And today we have Partha Ghosh. I'm not going to introduce him because that is what Krishnan Khanna ji will be doing. But I'm really delighted that we have taken off. And all those who are connected with us, you are most welcome to suggest some authorities whom you feel that they are the global leaders in their way, and their thoughts will really motivate many more to become the future leaders. I know stopping the problems, the global problems, is not so easy, but still, I'm sure when we make an effort, it does have an impact. So, without getting in between, I just stop here and request Krishan Khanna to introduce Partha Ghosh formally. Khanna sir.
Thank you, Commander. Uh, it's really an honor to introduce Partha Ghosh to our distinguished audience. I have known him for many years, not only as a ex-student of IIT KGP, but I have met a person who's very concerned about what's happening around him. Before I read about his professional
Frozen, I think.
Partha, which Partha chose for today's talk, because there is so much misery in the world. But in spite of that, he got into this very important subject. Partha Ghosh, for all of you who do not know his background, it's a very long CV, but I will just read out a few important points. He is a policy advisor and a strategist for corporates and governments. He works right across the developed world, USA, Europe, and Japan. He is also connected on an advisory basis with a large number of international MNCs. He was earlier partner of McKinsey, and he was founding managing director, and he started his own consulting called Partha S. Ghosh and Associates. He has chaired a number of startups as Boston Analytics and Global Online and Intersoft Japan. The very interesting aspect of his advisory is that he has the advantage of a thought process of an Eastern mind with the intellectual inputs
It's frozen, no?
mix these two and take which is the his blend of the East and West is something which I have not seen or other intellectual advisors who are advising corporates and MNCs. The other very important aspect which I would like to mention here about Partha Ghosh is that people normally think that leadership is only meant for CEOs and chairmen and MDs of companies. Completely wrong. Partha has got solutions for every type of employee in every organization because he strongly believes that leadership qualities is required at all levels, right from level 1 going up to level 10, and he has courses for all distinctive groups of employees. That is something very, very striking, because based on my experience in the corporate world, I can tell you very frankly that there are very few management experts and strategy advisors like Partha who look at the full spectrum of the human chain. The other very interesting point about Partha is, which many people may not know, but I'd like to mention it at this point. You see, we have 4,000, for example, colleges in India which are teaching management. We have 4,000 engineering colleges, polytechnics, IITs, and all that. But leadership is something where you can draw from that knowledge and implement it. You see, because implementation of management, implementation of knowledge will only happen if you have leadership qualities. What I am trying to suggest to the esteemed audience is that only technical knowledge or only management knowledge is a no-go, no-go. If you really want that to work, you must have leadership qualities, because then in a changing scenario, which changes every minute or every day in this world, your leadership qualities is what will enable you to take a correct decision and a useful decision and a decision which will benefit society and your community. So this is a very important aspect which I know Partha has mastered the art of doing this, and we are very fortunate that we have him here tonight. I would like to just end my introduction with two very important aspects of what Partha has done for the world. He has brought out two fantastic books. One is, about India at 75, which came out about a year ago. The other one, which came out this year, is India Towards 100.
Sir, your signal is.
Looks to be internet.
Yeah.
And actually achieve, and also yes, recommend to get hold of both these books and to really not only understand Partha, but also he has all the solutions for the world. So with that, I would like to say that I'm very thankful and honored that I've had the privilege of introducing my friend Partha, and I'm sure it's going to be a exciting journey which has just started. This is the third lecture, and it is going to be something which will just roll on and engulf the entire country and Asia and the rest of the world in time to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Kishanjit. Thank you, Commander. Thank you, Professor Vashni. Firstly, I'm highly, I would say, humbled the way Kishan introduced me. It is true that he has seen me develop as a student for the last 40 years, but I still continue to be a student. So what I will be sharing with you would be as a student reporting to all my seniors. Many of you are senior to me in IIT. All of you whom I respect, whether you're senior or junior. But the key point here is that we are indeed at a very critical point in history in the evolution of the global civilization, which need to be addressed, I believe, with an elevated purpose, with a deeper understanding of why we frequently end up in such crisis. As Jetli ji was talking about, that from the days of Mahabharata till today, in between, we have seen multiple wars, multiple crises, and time has come, given what's going on in the United States, between Russia and Ukraine, between different parts of the world, that we look at the future with a new perspective. It would be a tremendous failure for all of us here today as intellectuals not be able to think of a system which would enable good thinking, would enable enlightened synergies, not think of the world in terms of conflicts, but think of the world in terms of collaboration. It is very easy to do, but somehow we have found it extremely difficult. When I look at the 20th century, 170 million people lost their lives because of wars. And when I look at where we are in the 21st century, between 9/11 and today, the record has been equally dismal. And in fact, the situation has become more and more serious because beyond the conventional warfare is becoming more powerful. Today we have other lethal means like the digital cyber attacks, which could upset the healthcare system, the water system, the energy system, the financial system, the economic systems all over the world, which could be even more devastating. Forget the nukes. So we are indeed at a very critical point, and I'm glad that IIT Kharagpur, which has been the pioneer in many fields, have organized this lecture. And I do hope the Academy of Leadership would provide, as it gets built up, as Commander was talking about, a guidance to the world, guidance to younger people to look at the world with a different mindset. So I think this crisis indeed is very sad, but at the same time, it gives us an opportunity to think in new terms and see how we could ensure that we could come up with a concept, we come up with a framework which will uncover new type of leadership that the world is desperately looking for. And that's why we are here today. Now, I must say that when you look at the world has become significantly complex vis-a-vis where we were during the Second World War. We have more nuclear weapons. We are living in a connected world, digitally, economically, financially, with social media, cyber world triggering both positive and negative instincts at a global speed, at the speed of light. Any negative instinct could spread at the speed of light and can upset the global balance. So the consequence of any further escalation of the current carnage that we are seeing in Ukraine, in the center of Europe, could truly be devastating. And I think it is our responsibility to take the role of a leader, to see what could we do to make a difference. And all of you who've attended, I could see some of you have already played very, very important roles in life, but at the same time, you are at the youngest point given the rest of your life. So the question is, how do we move forward with a new spirit of youthfulness to create a new spirit of engagement? So first we have to recognize we are indeed at a very low point, and how different constituencies have responded so far to the current situation, I feel, is my very personal feeling, has exposed humanity to subpar ways we are governing the world. Clearly, deficit of leadership is becoming increasingly apparent all across. So we must reset. And what I'm saying, we have to learn how to move from zero sum to plus sum game towards a more enlightened dialogues to reach a more elevated state of being, and most importantly, becoming, of continuously seeking higher state of engagement, enlightenment. The good news is this morning, just before we began, I got a call from, so happened for a friend of mine in Washington, D.C., that the Ministry of Defense in Russia has announced they're going to reduce military activities near the capital city, Kyiv, following the discussion this morning after the Istanbul engagement, when people met in Istanbul from both Russia and Ukraine. I hope it is true, but that's good. Maybe because we are having this meeting, there has been some indications of positiveness already brewing in the minds of people in Russia, particularly, and Ukraine. And obviously, the politicians and the government machinery in Turkey are extremely proud of what they have been able to achieve in terms of Putin agreeing to meet with Zelensky and hope with the hope something positive would come out. So as I begin, at the outset, I want to make 3 points so that you could appreciate where I'm coming from. First, I do want to dedicate this lecture on behalf of Indian Institute of Technology, Kharagpur, on behalf of India, where IIT is located, to the people of Ukraine, and in honor of Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, and the soldiers who are losing their lives from both the nations, Ukraine and Russia, and reporters and supporters who are in the middle of this devastating carnage, which I believe is a product of myopic, limited understanding of how emotions evolve, cultures revolve, dissolve, evolve again, within and across borders, often drawn by a few to meet selfish objectives, often with incomplete perspectives, distorted logic, and defective tools. And what I am noticing that all of them are at play incomplete perspective, distorted logic, and defective tools on both sides of the engagement. Both sides of the engagement. And we have to find a way to get out of it. The second point I want to make, which is a positive point, it is indeed nice to witness the goodness of humanity as it is unfolding in Poland, in Romania, in Hungary, Moldova, different parts of Europe, in fact, different parts of the world, who are generously offering the warmth of their hearts and homes to keep the hopes and health of the refugees of Ukraine alive and positive. The number of refugees, as you know, is now close to about 4 million, and maybe within few weeks it will become 5 million. So we do have a serious challenge. What I learned in the process and continue to learn, that depending upon, and that's a very important point, and I'm seeing my good friend from Germany has joined, he would appreciate it, Paul Grumble, that depending upon what angle one looks at a problem, it looks different. It looks different. And as a result, most often the problems get poorly defined. They tend to be superficial and not connect with the root causes. Then irrespective of how poorly a problem may have been defined because of one line of sight, in spite of all the good intentions, the solutions that emerge is, if not more devastating, at best lukewarm and effective. So the problem that Europe is facing today is a product of that incomplete perspective with which we have come out of the Second World War, the fall of the the Berlin Wall, and where we are today. And I will provide you my perspective on that. So that's my point. With that, I think I would like to begin that often leaderships of the world very generously use the term unintended consequences. Leaders cannot afford that. Leaders should have the ability to see all the possible consequences with a systems thinking, holistic thinking, so that we could know what kind of surgical acts would lead to what kind of outcome. So for me, great leadership is one when influence change not from position of economic or military might or hierarchical power, but when we influence change on the basis of elevated, all-encompassing logic. And that's what, by the way, Vedic philosophy talks about. Power drawn from inner divine self, not to exert, mark my word, not to exert single vector solutions, but to inspire solutions which serve all the perspectives, integrate multiple vectors with equal degree of reverence, taking into account soft, historic, cultural, emotional, transactional instincts which are at play in such situation, both at macro and microeconomic level. So as you could see, any problem has got so many dimensions, so many historic, when we talk about Kashmir in India, when we talk about the problems in Afghanistan, when we talk about the problems in Ukraine, if you carefully analyze, we have taken actions based on incomplete analysis of the situation. And it's at the end of the day, common people end up paying. So unintended consequence, a term which is popularly used, is what I would call is a product of incomplete perspective. For me, that is one of the factors that contributes to the deficit of leadership. Great leaders have the ability to take a wide-angle view of a situation, have a natural passion to engage with the root causes. They analyze situation from multiple angles, perspective, with full empathy. I want to underscore the term, full empathy for alternative views, emotional instincts, however different they may be. And most importantly, do not impose his or her solutions, but inspires to drive the problem-solving process. Inspires to drive the problems. so that the great solutions emerge in a synergistic fashion. Now, if you now look through what has happened over the last 100 years, we have repeatedly failed to inspire solutions from multiple perspectives to solve problems. And that's where we are today. And that's why my hope the Academy of Leadership at IIT Kharagpur will develop qualities in young minds, not only in India, but all over the world. And that's the spirit with which we must move forward. So, what I have done is to analyze what I would define leadership is all about. And then, what I would like to do is to basically answer few questions to understand how we must come out of the current crisis in Europe and in the process create a new paradigm of development of our civilization. Now, before I do so, I want to make a couple of very philosophical points which I have cherished in my heart, thanks to all my friends with whom I work. Like I see Dr. Paul Grumble is here. He and I have talked about these issues for 3-4 decades in Germany, sometimes over lunch, sometimes over dinner. With many others, I've discussed such problems. And I think I want to draw on those. What are the lessons that we have learned? During moments of crisis, we do observe and experience always two sides of humanity. As we are seeing today, the positive side in Poland and Romania and Germany and all over the world where people are hosting the refugees, and the negative side, which we are seeing unfold in Russia. And most often, unfortunately, negative side overpowers the positive side and in the process damages the innocent and richer gifts of nature. We ultimately solve the problem, but after a lot of damages. And what is particularly concerning, most often, positive side of humanity becomes visible in reaction to, very important point in leadership, be proactive, but positive side becomes visible in reaction to negative instincts, sometimes too late. Rarely we have observed how the positive side proactively keep the negative side under check. We have rarely seen that. It only appears when we see the negative side, or even better, to keep the negative instincts not to surface at all. Not by force, but by inspiring goodness in situations, even when the signals of negative inclinations are feeble, less visible, or less audible, by defining what I call enlightened synergies between different perspectives. Now, if you look at the situation today, and how did we get into this situation, we need to really go deep into how human mind has worked. After all, I want to make a very fundamental point. In today's complex world, leadership is all about making uncommon connection between multiple aspirations. People do have aspirations, sometimes very noble, sometimes not so noble, sometimes crooked, sometimes straightforward, but that's natural. And so when such events occur, I think the key is how to raise the discussion to the highest common factor, which we often fail, as opposed to getting drawn into the rhetorics and threats that trigger the lowest common denominator. And unfortunately, some of the recent speeches that I've heard in Poland have such elements of that, where we have used rhetorics, we have talked about threats, which does not impose goodness on the other side. Accordingly, the purpose of today's discussion is how do we create the global dynamic, and how do we ensure what will define what we call quality leadership expression. So what I'll do is I'll answer basically 3 questions. Firstly, I'd like to briefly examine how humanity as a whole, and I'm not taking sides with any country, but I'm talking as a purely global citizen, as being part of the global humanity, how humanity seems to have continued to struggle in defining sustainable path to attain peace, prosperity, and progress. The point the commander was talking about for last thousands of years. With the hope that we'll agree we need to fundamentally change in terms of how nations, communities engage with each other at a most fundamental level. So I like to examine that quickly. Once we have done that, I would like to answer the second question. What are the real defects or flaws in the current mechanisms as to how we work with each other? In fact, often while working with each other, we unconsciously trigger conflicts. Mind you, there was a time, we'll talk a bit later, right after the fall of the Berlin Wall, Russia was part of the G8. Russia was part of the G8. There was a period of small honeymoon. But then what happened? These are important questions to ask. And then third, what we must be the fundamental principles with which the new mechanism must be deployed that will enable higher level expression of leadership towards a more enlightened governance of the planet. So these are the three questions I'll answer in the next 30 minutes or so. First, in the next 5 minutes, let me take a time machine with you to go back approximately 130 years when the first Parliament of Religions was organized in Chicago, which was the first international effort ever to bring together world religious leaders on common platform to embrace universalism. So we have gone from time to time with noble intentions that we want to bring the world together to promote peace around the world. In fact, as you know, many of you know, particularly those who are from India, that in this conference, Swami Vivekananda, only 29 years old that time, made a very powerful point, which is even true today. And what did he say? Sectarism, bigotry, and his horrible descendant, fanaticism, have been long possessed by the earth. And that's exactly what Dr. Commander Jaitley was talking about. They have filled the earth with violence, destroyed civilization, sent the whole nations to despair. Had it not been for these horrible demons, human society would have been far more advanced than it is now. Now, after 30 years, these observations he made, the thoughts he shared are even more valid. Because that's what he said 130 years. And you know what happened in the last 130 years. We faced two major world wars. In fact, in 1899, many of you may know, the first international peace conference was held in Hague, in Netherlands. For why was it held? For settling crises peacefully, preventing wars, and codifying rules of warfare. While during the same time, by the way, between 1886 and 1908, because of Belgian-Congo War, in that period, 8 million people in Congo lost their lives. So on one side, we are demonstrating the good intentions. But the language has always been a bit, I would say, off, in the sense we are talking about how to settle crisis peacefully. So we are assuming that crisis would occur as opposed to saying how to avoid crisis. So that is one thing to keep in mind. But then, as you know, after this International Peace of Conference, the World War first happened between 1914 and 1918. 20 million people lost their lives. What did we do? The League of Nations was formed by the victors. Again, by the victors, very important. Was everyone on the table? The people who won the war was in the table. After, in the Treaty of Versailles in 1999, it was signed to avoid wars, guarantee peace to humanity and security. But at the same time, while this was going on, between 1915 to 1923, Ottoman genocide was close to about 3 million people in around Armenia, etc., in the Ottoman Empire. So, as you know, in 1939, Germany, Italy, Japan left the League of Nations, and League of Nations became basically ineffective. And in the process, a war happened, the Second World War. 60 million people lost their lives. And then what happens? We again create another group of people, which we call the United Nations, which was established in April 26, 1945. Now, since the establishment of United Nations till today, how many wars have happened? Korea, Vietnam, Middle East, Arab-Israel crisis, partition of India, and you can go on and on. And my calculation says we lost close to 50 million people in wars and conflicts, and many more millions were displaced. So this is telling us something, that on one side we come together, we announce peace, we announce we'll avoid war, but we keep drawn into wars. Why? And my theory is that our design of such mechanism is flawed. The way capitalism has spread and affected different aspects of political, geopolitical life, what does it capitalism say? Adam Smith's basic point was power of self-interest, survival of the fittest. So obviously we're saying the self would fight with another self. If there are two players, one would survive, survival of the fittest. Obviously, the whole concept has to be re-examined, and that was maybe the second part of my discussion, that why the current mechanisms, call it United Nations, call it the alliances, NATO, the rhetorics and the sanctions that we are being used are not working. Mind you, I mean, sanctions have been used against Iran, against Russia, against Venezuela, against Korea, but nothing has changed. But Korea, 2 days ago, launched a major missile. So as you could see, leadership is not working. There's a fundamental deficit where what our intentions are and what ends up happening, there's a disconnect. That's not leadership. So let me try to get to the second question, why it is not working. And I would like to go very deep into it with you. If you look at a philosophical level, the basic construct of the organizations like League of Nations, like United Nations, so any kind of alliances that we form, there are a lot of different groups around the world, is based on a fundamental belief in our inner conscience or maybe our subconscious, that evolution is based on natural law of selection. Competitive instincts are natural. Survival of the fittest has shaped the evolution of life. Some lose, others win. Winners define the rules of the next play. Others feel like as outsiders or struggle to belong. That has been the dynamic. That has been the dynamic which we have to understand. We have increasingly embraced that society's progress by unleashing the power of self-interest, and conflicts are natural possibilities that we have to face time to time. Because if you look at the mission statement of League of Nations, United Nations, they're saying we will avoid conflicts. So they are assuming conflicts will happen. And as a result, what happens? A few thoughts that are more dominant typically become more powerful. Economically and militarily powerful people trump over others. Nobler or wiser thoughts, less powerful, do not get the right attention. So organizations such as the United Nations are essentially designed to resolve conflict, assuming conflicts will occur, for a few to take upper hand role in correcting or punishing alternative ways which lead to disobedience, the cycle of conflicts becomes only natural and only vicious, and life goes on. That is my analysis. Why UN, in spite of all the good attention and the billions of dollars spent every year, there's a beautiful building on the 45th and First Avenue, and UN branches all over the world. But wars have continued. Millions of people have not been able to lost their lives or not been able to lead a peaceful life. So, with no mechanism in place, today we do not have any mechanism in place to inspire goodness. Now, they are typically limited to religions, but we need global mechanism to inspire goodness, not to resolve conflicts. Maybe that could be subservient to address the root causes that create conflicts and or how to accommodate alternative views to create what I would call enlightened synergies. And that's where I like to underscore the importance of Vedic philosophy, because it has always said that we have to be inclusive, harmonize multiple point of views, as opposed to saying it's my view or the highway. That they say one way or the highway, my way or the highway. I mean, that is a wrong approach to where we are in global affairs today. So the design philosophy is wrong. The second point I want to make, where is the flaw? At the strategic level, that was a philosophical level. The design is wrong. At a strategic level, the basic principle of game theory has been misplaced. Unsettling old balance without visioning of the new balance is a very important point to understand. And that's why we can perhaps understand where Putin is coming from vis-a-vis Europe, vis-a-vis NATO, vis-a-vis the Western world. I'm not saying he's right, but unless we understand someone with whom we are trying to negotiate, we'll never be able to get into a meaningful engagement. And let me spend some time with you to offer my analysis of what is happening in the European dynamic today vis-a-vis NATO and Russia. As you very well know, that NATO was established by 12 original founding member states, which we call the North Atlantic Treaty, which was signed in Washington, D.C. in 4th April in 1949. Article 5 of the treaty clearly states, if an armed attack occurs against one of the member states, it shall be considered an attack against all members, and other members should assist the attacked member with armed forces if necessary. So the whole concept is about attack and defense. Its purpose was to secure peace in Europe, to promote cooperation among its members, and guard their freedom. All of this in the context of, very important, in the context of countering threat posed by that time the Soviet Union. Now, what I find interesting, in response, what did the Soviet bloc do? In 1955, the Warsaw Pact was formed, as you know, by Soviet Union with 7 Eastern Bloc nations as a collective defense in response. Keep in mind, in response to NATO. Both sides' mindset is increasingly suspicious of each other, conditioned to counter likely wars as opposed to building collaborative relationships. Again, we are thinking in terms of conflict as opposed to collaboration between different systems, ways of thinking, leading to the term Cold War as opposed to working towards a warm exploration of the future. Mark my word. Cold War, we'll live with the Cold War. We will keep our missiles pointed towards each other to maintain the balance, as opposed to working towards a warm exploration of many problems that the world is facing. Now let's go deeper. During the Cold War, arms race was at play. Somehow the uneasy spirit of peace was restored in Europe, but which was basically the balance of power was at play, while more than a dozen of conflicts, which is very important, continued all over the world. East Asia, as you know, South Korea, Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Cambodia, South Asia, India, Pakistan, struggles, Middle East, Africa, and quite frequently, what happened during this war? The two blocs took opposite sides. So while there's a peace in Europe, the sides were taking and perhaps participating in the conflicts all over the world. In place to help it to resolve conflicts, the two blocs escalated conflicts. Tensions between two blocs surfaced as wars in different parts of the world, like a virus of tensions between East and West spread all over the world. So that's a struggle. Now I'll go another step deeper. Now something very interesting happened, which my friend Dr. Paul Gumbel was very much in limelight that time. During the night of November 9th, 1989, what happened? Something fundamentally changed. With the dismantling of the Berlin Wall, a barrier that has symbolized the Cold War for 30 years disappeared. By October 1990, Germany was reunified, which is good, triggering the swift collapse of the Eastern European regimes. On December 1991, Gorbachev resigned and the Soviet Union Republic got dissolved. The former Cold War adversaries lifted, good news, diplomatic restrictions, and new world started emerging, and the START agreement, which you guys are familiar with, was signed, which is START standing for Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty Organization. That's where I felt a decent honeymoon began. The dating between the two powers, Russia, began. Beginning in 1994, Russia joined the discussions, and the group became the G8. G7 now became G8. Russia became the part of the G8 in 1997, and the dating period did begin. Many global leaders, which I had the privilege to interact with, including a person like Lee Kuan Yew, and I'm talking about a personal meeting I had met with Suleiman Demirel, who was heading up Turkey. They expected, and I similarly expected, a peaceful world is finally emerging. Particularly when Russia became part of G8, which finally was hopefully a more enlightened path towards peace. But then where did we go wrong? What happened? That is the question we have to answer. And that's where the game theory comes into play. After the Cold War, after the Cold War was over, what did NATO do? NATO added 14 new members between 1999 and 2020. A treaty of 30 nations was formed, as Russia on the other side is still adjusting to the collapse of the Soviet Union. So the balance was there, one side collapsing, the other side became bigger, and that was poorly managed by the West. In the eyes of Russian leadership, stronger NATO, weaker Russia, and yet Russia is member of G7 plus 1. I purposely was calling it G7 plus 1, one being Russia. So deeper instincts within Russia as a result, I would imagine, no one has spoken to me about, became increasingly uncomfortable. For wanting to be allies who were adversaries before, signals of adversarial equation perhaps began fermenting within the future leaders of Russia. That time Putin was very young, he was a member of the KGB, but he's looking at the world a bit differently. Then on one side, we are trying to become friends. On the other side, our quote-unquote adversary, NATO, is becoming stronger. What is going on? It's a natural question to ask. So if we wanted peace, we should have asked the game theory that was at work during the Cold Trade War, what would be the game theory of the future? I'll spend some time. I call the game theory was misapplied. If peaceful existence was the ultimate objective of stronger NATO, in turn of the millennium, instead of rebuilding and making NATO bigger, perhaps the purpose of NATO should have been re-examined in the context of Russia becoming part of G8, in the context of think of how to deal with the Commonwealth of independent states, which are the Eastern European nations, not really bringing them closer to NATO, neither saying let's form the Soviet bloc, but to create a harmony of multiple different aspirations. That did not happen. That's where I personally feel the United States lost a great opportunity to create a significant more harmony. And instead, what happened, that you all know, something fundamentally again changed in March of 2014. Russia precipitated an international crisis when it occupied Crimea, an autonomous republic of Ukraine. So, what happened? Obviously, Russia dropped out of G7. Russia was asked to leave G7. And in the process, a new dynamic of struggle emerged between Russia, quote unquote, NATO, or the West. So, that is the second problem. The game theory was properly misapplied. The first problem was there was a flaw in the design of how we try to deal with conflicts. The third problem, see how we have created one after another. The tactics based on sanctions have become tired and blunt. As I mentioned earlier, sanctions have been tried continuously, and it is obviously a power of the rich. If you're economically rich, if you're buying and selling, you have that power to exert on the poor or to the adversary. And we continue to work with sanctions, which unfortunately did not work well even today. In fact, if you look at the last 4 weeks, as sanctions were inched up, the Russian missiles started moving more and more towards western part of Ukraine. The good news today, apparently, the ministry has announced they would be open to talks with Ukrainian leader. Putin and Zelensky would meet. So that's good news. But as you could see, the sanctions have continued to be very blunt and perhaps have become very tired. The US record of sanctions on other nations have rarely worked, as we have witnessed in North Korea, Iran, Venezuela, Russia. So I think we have to think of sanctions in new firms so that indeed we could be significantly more surgical in dealing with these difficult moments. So in short, I would say sanctions are not only ineffective, they have often undermined, if not upset US allies, impoverished common people, because sanctions are not really working for Europe, though Germany and other European nations have agreed to the sanction. But 50% of energy comes from Russia. And energy is the backbone of any economic system. So people get encouraged, and then what happens? The impoverished common people are often encouraged to join other currencies other than dollar. In fact, it has empowered China to be an alternative choice of nations to work with, and have increased the possibility of China, Russia, North Korea to become more tighter with broadened aspirations. And that's dangerous. 3 powers with nuclear weapons, all in Asia, with global implications. So in fact, today, while protecting the expanding interests of NATO, China, and Russia, and several African and South American nations are forming interesting alliances which will further complicate the world, a new type of geopolitical economic disorder, not order, might emerge, which will make the future even more complex. So my second part analyzes that we have to change all the instruments, whether we are talking about sanctions, whether we are talking about game theory, or whether we are talking about the philosophical construct, are flawed. So then the next question is, what should it be in the future? And I would like to offer my humble thoughts in the next 5 minutes, and then we could have a discussion to see how we could perhaps begin a process of change in the world, what could be the role of Indian government, what could be the role of the academy, what could be the role of various governments around the world to create this new world. So moving forward, we need to first reimagine the governance of the world in view of how the future might emerge. See, one thing where we often go wrong, we design systems based on what has happened in the past without thinking what might the new world look like. So we have to first understand what might be the new world like, and then understand the flaws that we have had in the past design, and then come up with the fundamental principles of the future architecture. And that is, to me, leadership. So you first must realize that there's a need now, right now, that we have to shift from what we have often viewed as zero-sum game, that some win, some lose, as if the world is zero. If you take away from someone 2 pennies, someone gains 2 pennies. We have to switch to plus some logic. And that's a very different kind of logic. And that's where I feel Vedic philosophy has a lot to offer to the world. With German philosopher Max Muller, often talked about that, and Toynbee has talked about that the Vedic philosophy has to be taught in every school, in every colleges, every universities around the world. And that would be perhaps the role of the Academy of Leadership. So let me now get to the first point. Now, when we think of the future, we must realize at a fundamental different level what is changing. Technology that we are living in is that we are in an interconnected world. So we cannot think of A versus B because we are all connected digitally. We're seamlessly connected, enabling free flow of information, free flow of imagination, free flow of thoughts. If they're good, they have a tremendously positive value. If they're negative, they can upset systems dramatically, which I call the cyber attacks. But that's one aspect of the world. Second, physical borders, and Singapore is a great example, Switzerland is a great example, are less relevant. How big the country is, how much land we occupy, is becoming less and less important because wealth creation has become dependent on knowledge base, knowledge economy, imagination. And many small countries, whether we talk about Sweden, Norway, Switzerland, Singapore, they're small nations, they're not fighting wars, but they're doing extremely well economically. Now, if you look at India as a collection of 100 Singapores and 20 Swedens, we can look at the world a bit differently, making each of these entities successful in a knowledge-based world. Borders become less important. And the third point is perhaps very important. As we have begun the space exploration, thanks to people like Bezos and Musk and Branson and many others, is getting commercialized. Humanity is coming together. It is no longer fight for borders between each other, but we are thinking of the third dimension, a vertical dimension, space exploration as humanity. So from technological point of view, purely from technological point of view, there is a tremendous opportunity to think as one humanity, which Vedic philosophy has always preached, one humanity. On the other side, if you look at the challenges that humanity is faced today, we're talking about climate change, we're talking about increasing wealth gap, human migration, shrinking supply of natural resources, and need to develop a circular economy on a global scale, because we have to learn how to recycle, and that too have to do on a global scale. So the need to think as one globe, as one humanity, from technological point of view, as well as the challenges the world is faced. I'm not talking about wars anymore. Purely from the progress of humanity, it is important that we find a new design, and not a design which was designed after the Second World War, design which will shape the 2022 100. Design would be sustainable for the next 500 years. So there I would like to offer you 3 points as we looked at the flaws along 3 dimensions: philosophical, strategic, and then we talked about operational sanctions, etc. What are the equivalent of that? I think the philosophical construct of any organization which is dealing with the global issues, should be based on laws of evolution, laws of nature that are not competitive but collaborative. There are a lot of laws where you see the collaboration between species have helped development of nature, the fitness of nature. So instead of thinking of survival of the fittest, we have to think of fitness of nature. Very different thinking. That we have to think of the fitness of species which come together, which will enable enlightened synergies, not necessarily to resolve conflicts, but to proactively minimize and eliminate possibilities of conflict. Very important point. And we did not have such organizations where we are enabling enlightened synergies. We discuss conflicts. If you look at the United Nations discussions, we are always voting against an idea, for an idea. There's always 10 on one side, 15 on the other side. We are basically created mechanisms to create divisions. Very important point to keep in mind. Conflict resolution should not be the primary objective. It should be subservient. Of course, conflicts would occur, but if we promote enlightened synergies when conflicts occur, it should be subservient to the plus-sum logic, as opposed to creating zero-sum logic. Very important point. In order to do so, we need to develop a new leadership framework, and that's where the Academy of Leadership at IIT Kharagpur becomes extremely important. It is for the globe. It's located near Hijli Jail, which is the right place to locate. Accommodate multiple views, leadership who could accommodate multiple views, however different they may be from the view I might have. Enable coexistence of multiple economic, political, cultural systems. If I am living in a capitalist system, I do not have a right to criticize socialistic system. That is a choice someone has made. But to find, instead of rejecting alternatives, how to synergize possibilities between different paths. Exactly what Vivekananda said, that various streams come and meet in the ocean. That's what Vedic philosophy talks about. And that's what we have to preach. The essentials of Vedic philosophy, which is about harmony, which is about one humanity, which is about inclusiveness, emphasizes the importance of spiritual, intellectual development over materialism. Not that materialism should be rejected, but if materialism supersedes intellectualism and spiritualism, we talk about conflicts, because materialism you count, you measure, and obviously there would be question of who gets what, who wins, who loses. So when materialism trumps over spiritualism, our mindset becomes indeed transactional. Our mindset breeds culture of divisionalism when we need humanism. When we need humanism as one humanity. At a strategic level, so that is a philosophical level, we have to think very differently to design organizations. At a strategic level, we could still work with dynamic game theory, but it has to move looking at the balance of power as adversaries, balance in terms of collaboration. And you have to keep in mind, collaboration, like competition, is also increasingly unstable. Collaboration is also increasingly unstable. Periods of cooperative prosperity, collaborative progress are often followed by complacence, sometimes unexpected defections. This collaboration often doesn't work as we want. So we have to keep that in mind when we are talking about game theory of collaboration, of enlightened synergies. Cycles of collaboration and defections are visible in ups and downs of human society. We have seen that as there are oscillations of political and financial systems. Sometimes things move up, sometimes things go downwards, and we have to be prepared for such moves in designing the new system of collaboration. Leadership must learn how to manage such cycles in a fashion that unintended consequences are proactively tempered. We use it too generously. Well, that was an unintended consequence, as if it's not my responsibility. A good leader have no opportunity to say sorry. A good leadership should be able to understand the cycles, understand the broad picture, and in the process design mechanisms to have things working. So we have to learn in the Leadership Academy, particularly how to practice compassion and collaboration and nurture what I would call altruistic instincts to become enlightened. And that, by the way, what used to be taught in Taxila and Nalanda. And we should feel good about it. It is there. But unfortunately, we are not practicing today. It was all about enlightening the spiritual base to seek physical and intellectual expansions. So it reminds me of an ancient Indian sage. With that, I will start moving towards the end of my talk. Nagarjuna. All of you have heard about Nagarjuna. He laid out, if you and the world wish to attain unparalleled enlightenment, and which we all do, his roots are altruistic aspiration to enlightenment, firm like the monarch of mountains, compassion reaching all quarters, and wisdom not relying on duality. Very important. A versus B. Wisdom, if I may add, should be based on our ability to fuse multiple streams of thinking, be they be intellectual, political, cultural, economic, or spiritual. And that is missing today in our universities, in our schools. That how do people fuse ideas, bring ideas, however different they may be, to create more enlightened state? And that's where I think we have tremendous opportunity to make a difference as we move forward. While with such philosophical strategic, chances of conflicts will significantly be reduced. That I can almost bet on. But should they occur, leadership should work with wider set of policy tools, not be limited to economic sanctions. I'm going back to that, because they create problems for the world. Think of the sanctions today. With the energy prices going up, who is suffering? The poor people in Africa, because the fertilizer prices have gone up. Energy prices have gone up. Who is suffering today? The common people in Russia and Ukraine. Does it touch the life of Putin? So we have to learn how to be significantly more surgical. And I feel a bit sorry that in spite of being very close myself to the Kennedy School at Harvard, the Woodrow Wilson School in Princeton, there are a lot of great schools, Fletcher School at Tufts. The art of diplomacy has still remained what it was 100 years ago. The world has changed. So we have to renew the art of diplomacy. And that's where we would be able to come up with more surgical tools so that should problems occur, we know how to deal with them. Firstly, we should create a system, that's my main point, where such problems should not occur, because I'm using the word enlightened synergies. But should they occur, the default mechanism should be also much smarter, not depend on tools which have become blunt, tired, and ineffective. So I would like to end with one final point, that we are talking about collaboration. We are talking about expanded mindset. We are talking about switching from negative to positive energies. And to do so, I think we have to learn how we think in three vectors, Our education system should reflect that. Our corporate life should reflect that. Our government should reflect that. Those three vectors are, we normally think in two dimensions, but there has to be three dimensions of thinking. One is straightforward, which I call the material, physical, or economic vector, is important, but it should not be the only driver. Second is the intellectual vector, so that we can continually smarten ourselves to deal with the world, not reactively, but proactively. That's called good thinking. And third, the most important one, which should guide the other two vectors, which is spiritual vector. And spiritual vector should not be treated, well, I go to temple once a week. We treat the spiritual side as religion. Spiritual side is the spirit, the development of the heart and the mind, integrated with this development of the body and the physics and the development of the intellect. Is that's where our real opportunity is, and that's what I think the Academy of Leadership should commit to promote for the world, for the nation, for the community, for our students. And with that, I'd like to thank you very much, and I do hope that as we have dedicated the lecture to the people of Ukraine and to its president, that we could take it forward with a positive spirit, but with tempered mindset, with humble mindset. With that, I'd like to thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. I think, I would try to address, since we have limited time, I feel that three common points came up. One is the point, Puran, you answered and Anil raised, that how do we begin? And I think that's why the Academy of Leadership is so important and all of your support is so important, that we should begin with young minds, let them help think differently, not treat spiritual development as a religion, spiritual development is development of the heart as much as the development of the brain and the body. I think somehow we don't do that, and good news is that once upon a time, particularly when we talk about Nalanda and Takshila in India, and also the early days of the, Harvard University, how did it start? Harvard started with divinity school. So the spiritual development, even in Oxford and Cambridge, earliest days was very, very important. We used to teach theology. Theology was a big subject. So somehow theology became religion as opposed to development of the spirit. We have to bring it back. So we do have the experience. We have to bring it back and put it on the center stage of our education system. And the academy hopefully will begin that journey, not only for India, but for all over the world. The second point which I stood out, many of you touched on, how could India play a role given its Vedic philosophy? Will people listen to India? My answer is very simple on that one. Let India become a model. If India becomes a model by practicing what Indian philosophy perhaps proposed and suggested and developed 5,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago, let that become visible to the eyes of the people around the world. No point talking about it. If we just talk, you're right. Why should people listen? But why do people listen to America today? The only reason is, in a very short period between Abraham Lincoln and the Second World War, from being nothing where people North and South were fighting wars, by 1914, America became a major power, and people really admired that period of enterprising spirit, from Andrew Carnegie to Thomas Edison to Rockefellers to Wright brothers, and you can go on and on. So America earned that stature based on the American system, and people all look up to the country, used to look up, and now I think the stature is changing a little bit. Now, India has to practice the Vedicism and make India a model, and then the world would look up to it. So that is, I think, was a common point between 2 or 3 points that was raised between Ramakrishna and others. Then the third point which stood out, which my friend Paul Grumble and Jerry Brightman talked about, this conference is extremely important, what you suggested, Jerry. And Jerry, I'll give you the responsibility on behalf of IIT and Tufts and MIT, all the universities that I deal with, because you are a very dynamic person. By the way, people who do not know Jerry, Jerry has been all over the world. He has been teaching the subject of leadership for last 30 years, and everyone who goes to Jerry's class not only build castles, they build the world. He starts with castles, but then they create the world. So Jerry, we would do the conference. I think world needs it. We cannot chicken out by saying, well, this conference is over. We, with help of Commander, by the way, we are very lucky to have Commander because he commands. We will encourage him to command a conference, Commander, hosted by the Academy. And I will make sure that we do a 3-day conference. I don't know how it will be structured, but that is required. Because otherwise, what happens, we have good meetings, good ideas, but then they get diffused. We cannot allow that. So that is the second point. And the final point I would make, which is a very powerful point, which Tridivesh made. Tridivesh made a very powerful point. I do not want that to get lost. Because 70 to 75% of the people in the world are still in the rural communities. And they are the ones who suffer the most when wars occur. All of a sudden, price of wheat goes up, price of fertilizer goes up, price of potato goes up, and whatever they earn, if they earn $100, they spend $90 on food. If the price goes up but the earning comes down, they are the ones who suffer. So I think the model that Tridivesh's company is defining, I would like all of you to help Tridivesh. He has developed a model which is multilingual model, which helps the farmer to take advantage of the local conditions to grow crops with global knowledge. Because in the cloud, suppose there's a Punjabi farmer in Punjab and there's a Chilean farmer who speaks Spanish, but they talk in their own language and gets translated by the cloud and artificial intelligence. So the best practices around the world could be shared. What a powerful concept. And Tridivesh, unfortunately, you are sitting on it. Your time has come. We would all help you to make this technology the mainstream change in the world, because you can change the life of 90% of the people. And that I think should be one of the programs the Academy of Leadership could take up. In the process, the Academy could make some money. In the process, the Academy could grow. And in the process, we could create multiple outposts all over the world. And Commander, I would again suggest you command us, we will do it. I mean, Commander, by the way, is very well known in Indian Navy. He has commanded a lot of ships around the world, but now he's really trying to command the development of this academy, which will become, hopefully, the change that we are all suggesting. And the final point, I'll go back to Anil's opening point and then I'll close down. I personally believe, that is my very personal belief. I always use that term, if it is to be, it's up to me. So if each one of us believe that, as opposed to saying it's his problem, her problem, they don't understand, but we own it ourselves, and fortunately we have great thought leaders in this meeting, we own it together, we can unfold a movement in the spirit of, if it is to be, let me call it, if it is to be us meaning this group, it is to be. And we think with that, I would like to thank all of you, as Puran, you have suggested, by taking it to the lives of common people, of the young people, not all over the world. It cannot begin in one place. It has to be all over the world.
When we are talking about the harmony, I would just like to tell all my friends, and particularly who are non-Indians, that in our home, when we worship in the morning, we say, Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha, Sarve Santu Niramaya. That means, let everybody in the world be happy. Let everybody in the world be away from all the ills and the problems and the diseases. Sarve bhavantu sukhina, sarve santu niramaya, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dubhag bhavet. That means let us see all good things in this world. That is what it means. And let there not be anybody who is having any types of sufferings. And we say Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. That means the whole world is one family. Now let that be the motto of the United Nations. Then the United Nations can play its role. Today, United Nations is selective in taking its decision that where the lobby is, where the pressure is. If their motto is Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina Sarve Santu Niramaya and Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, that will guide them in the real sense to bring harmony in this world. Thank you very much. Now may I request Trilok Singh ji to please offer a vote of thanks formally.
Hello, good evening from Asia. Good morning to United States and good afternoon to Europe. This is Trilok Singh, Vice Chairman Partha Ghosh Academy of Leadership, IIT Kharagpur. On behalf of Academy, before I formally give the vote of thanks, I would like to just conclude in a 1 or 2 minutes what today's talk taught us. So first of all, thank you, Dr. Ghosh, for giving very wonderful talk. So I have summarized in my own way because his title of today's talk was "Crisis in Europe equal to the crisis in the world crisis." It's going to, create problem for everybody around the world. So what his analysis taught us, I summarize in 3 M's. That is man management, because he talked about or his analysis, as per his analysis, that the problem of the world is poorly defined. It is because of one line of sight of thinking. If we think holistically, this might be solved in a better way, so that there will not be a deficit in the world. Second thing he talked about, or he analyzes that the money, because he talked about the formation of UN, and it was not able to fulfill its objective, because the conflicts still exist around the world. So money cannot play a big role, but sometimes, yeah, money is the key factor. Third one is, as I'm a scientist, I see, molecule is the most powerful things. As Dr. Ghosh has rightly pointed out, that we make missiles by using these molecules, and we said these, we position these missiles to towards different countries to neutralize the cause and effect. So this is not the way of development, or this is not the way of a great leadership quality. So if we really wanted to go further, he talked about philosophical and statistical ways. So, which I personally feel that these are the two key points from today's talk: is that we have to think philosophically, as well as for the development, for the betterment of human being, we should think statistically. So, with this, I would like to thank all the guests, those who have joined across the globe of Dr. Parthago's lecture. And from the academy, I would like to thank IIT Kharagpur for giving all the possible facility to us to organize this one. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.